The sky had turned the color of steel wool, a dull gray that pressed low over the cracked stretch of highway. Wind whispered through the brittle trees that lined the edge of Pinewood Haven rest stop. Carrying the dry scent of dust and autumn leaves, it was the kind of place most people passed without a second glance, just a faded picnic table, a rusted trash can, and a patch of grass trying its best to survive the season. Michael Carter pulled their old minivan into a spot near the edge, engine sputtering before going quiet. He sat for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, watching as his daughter Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and bounced in place with the kind of energy only an 8-year-old could muster after a long drive. "Can we eat now?" she asked, her voice lifting with hope. "Yeah, kiddo," he said, forcing a tired smile. "Let's see what the pantry's got." The pantry was a cooler wedged behind the driver's seat, stocked with whatever he could scrape together before they left their last temporary stop, 2 hot dogs, half a bag of baby carrots, and a few slices of sandwich bread. Not gourmet, but better than nothing. He popped the trunk, pulled out their battered propane stove, and set it up on the worn concrete slab near the picnic table. Emma dragged over their single camp chair and sat cross-legged, watching him as he lit the burner with practiced hands. The flame flickered to life, casting a soft blue glow that danced in the gathering dusk. She hugged her knees and shivered in her jacket. "Think we'll see any stars tonight?" she asked. "Maybe," Michael said. "If the clouds roll out." He placed the pan over the flame and dropped in the hot dogs, listening to them sizzle faintly. For a brief second, the scent of frying meat cut through the cold air and made the rest stop feel a little less empty. A few yards away, the tall shape of a white RV sat parked, lights glowing faintly inside, quiet as a mausoleum. Michael didn't notice the woman watching from behind its tinted glass, but she saw everything, every small gesture, every careful move of a father doing his best in the middle of nowhere, and something in her chest shifted. Barely perceptible but real. Catherine Reynolds sat curled on the built-in bench seat by the window, her knees drawn to her chest and a cashmere throw wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Outside, the cold settled in like a second skin, stretching shadows long and painting everything in the dull hue of early evening. The faint clatter of metal and the quiet pop of a flame reached her through the double-pane glass. She hadn't meant to look, but something about the flicker of movement just beyond the trees had caught her attention. She angled the window, blind open a little farther. The man, maybe mid-30s, was crouched beside a portable stove, carefully rotating 2 small hot dogs in a dented frying pan. His posture wasn't rushed or careless. Every motion was deliberate, efficient. Nearby, a little girl sat wrapped in a puffy blue coat several sizes too big, her boots swinging above the cold ground. She was saying something to him, words lost on the wind, but whatever it was made him laugh a low, warm sound Catherine couldn't hear, but somehow felt. They didn't see her. Why would they? Her RV, a sleek, state-of-the-art coach designed for quiet luxury, looked more like a showroom display than a home. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and cedar oil. Soft jazz played on low from the built-in speakers, and the espresso machine blinked politely in standby. It was comfortable, impeccable, empty. She took a sip from the mug in her hands. Though the coffee had gone cold, she'd made it out of habit. Just something to do. That was all she did lately, small distractions to avoid the silence in her chest. Catherine didn't know why she couldn't look away from them. Maybe it was the way the man glanced at the girl, not just checking on her, but seeing her, like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. Maybe it was the way they made a meal out of nearly nothing, with no bitterness or complaint. She shifted slightly, resting her cheek against the cold glass, and exhaled. They had less than she ever had, and yet something about them looked more like home than anything she'd built for herself. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like running. Michael felt it before he saw it, that sense of being watched, a subtle shift in the air like a shadow resting where it hadn't been a moment ago. He looked up from the pan just long enough to glance across the lot. The white RV sat quiet, its windows darkened by tint, but one small strip glowed faintly with movement behind it, just a shape, a silhouette, then stillness again. He turned back to the stove. The hot dogs were nearly done, so he reached for the small plastic tub at his feet, flipping open the lid to reveal a Ziploc bag of cooked pasta and a tiny container of shredded cheese. Emma clapped softly, a grin stretching beneath her pink fleece hood. "Mac and cheese time," she asked, already knowing the answer. "Best dinner on the highway," Michael said with a wink. He tossed the noodles into the pan, added a splash of milk from the thermos, and stirred until the cheese began to melt into the mess of elbow macaroni. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't even hot enough, not really, but it smelled familiar. Comforting. The kind of dinner that came with shared glances and silly stories and the occasional spilled spoon. Emma climbed onto the bench, her breath fogging the air as she waited patiently. Michael spooned the food into a camping bowl, lightly chipped at the rim, and handed it over. "Bon appetit, madam," he said with a mock bow. She giggled and took a big bite, humming happily around the spoon. Michael watched her for a moment, then settled beside her, splitting the rest between two paper plates. They ate in sync, quietly, their faces glowing in the fading light of the tiny stove. He didn't look back at the RV again, though he could feel her gaze like the warmth of a campfire at his back. Whoever she was, whatever had brought her here. He figured she'd move on soon enough. They all did. But here, in this still moment, with a bowl of lukewarm mac and cheese and his daughter beside him, Michael had everything he needed. No granite countertops, no linen napkins, just love served under a darkening sky. The wind had settled into a lazy sway through the trees, rustling brittle leaves across the pavement. Dinner was done, the dishes wiped clean with paper towels and packed back into their bin. Michael was stretching his legs, arms crossed as he looked toward the sky, searching for a sliver of starlight through the cloud cover. Emma, however, had other plans. "I think it needs salt," she said, tongue poking out in thought as she scooped up another bite of mac and cheese from the bowl she'd insisted on finishing. Michael chuckled. "We're out. Use the last of it in Nevada. Remember." Emma tapped her spoon against her lip, considering, then, without another word. She slid off the bench and trotted across the parking lot, her boots thudding softly on the concrete. "Hey, Emma!" Michael called after her, startled. "Where are you going?" "To ask the lady in the RV if she has some," she shouted back over her shoulder, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Michael opened his mouth to protest, but she was already halfway there. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Great. Catherine had seen the girl coming before Michael had. She'd leaned back from the window out of instinct, her heart thumping for reasons she couldn't explain. And then there she was, a little girl with wind-chapped cheeks, wide eyes, and the kind of boldness that only came from being raised with trust. "Hi," Emma said, stepping right up to the door of the RV. "Sorry to bother you. Do you have any salt?" Catherine blinked, stunned. She hesitated, then stood and opened the door slowly. The cold crept in like a whisper as she stepped down. Blankets still wrapped around her shoulders. "Salt?" she asked, confused but amused. "For mac and cheese. It's good, but not great," Emma said matter-of-factly. Catherine smiled in spite of herself. "I might have some." Her voice softened. "Would you like me to bring it over?" Emma lit up. "Want to come with me? My dad made dinner. It's okay if you're hungry." Catherine hesitated, then nodded. For the first time in a long while, she crossed the line between watching and being seen. Catherine followed Emma across the lot, the tips of her boots catching tiny pebbles as she walked. The wind tugged at her blanket, and she pulled it tighter around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how much she didn't belong here out in the open, on cold pavement, stepping into someone else's world. A simple world, a warm one she hadn't felt part of in years. Michael stood near the picnic table, arms crossed, brow creased with the kind of caution that came naturally to a man raising a child alone. As they approached, he straightened. "Hey," he said, eyes flicking between Catherine and his daughter. "Everything okay?" Emma answered before either adult could speak. "She had salt. Told you." Catherine held out a small glass jar, the label worn off. Hope this helps. Michael took it with a nod, his expression unreadable. Thanks. Appreciate it. There was a pause, just long enough for the silence to feel heavy, before Catherine extended a hand, fingers peeking from beneath the blanket. I'm Catherine. He looked at her, hesitated, then shook her hand with a firm grip. Michael, and that's Emma. Emma gave a little wave, already back to eating the last few bites in her bowl. Catherine glanced at the small setup, the worn stove, the folding table, the Tupperware, and something in her chest gave a quiet, reluctant ache. I didn't mean to intrude, she said. I was just watching from the window. You two looked happy. Michael raised an eyebrow. Happy might be generous, he said with a faint smile. But we manage. She nodded, unsure of what to say next. So she tried what she knew, a carefully curated version of the truth. I've just been traveling for a while. Needed to get away. That RV is more home than anything else right now. He didn't press, and she appreciated that. He just nodded slowly, accepting it at face value. Well, we've got more food if you're hungry, he said finally. It's nothing fancy. Mac and cheese, hot dogs, a gourmet paper plate experience. Catherine laughed, quiet but genuine. Honestly, that sounds kind of perfect. And just like that, the space between them shifted, still unfamiliar, still fragile, but a little less lonely than before. Catherine hesitated only a second before lowering herself onto the picnic bench beside Emma, careful not to let her blanket slip too far from her shoulders. The seat was cold, slightly uneven, and the table bore the worn carvings of travelers' long-gone initials. Hearts. A crude sketch of what might have once been a dog. It was a far cry from the polished wood and white linen she was used to, but somehow it felt more real. Michael didn't make a fuss. He simply handed her a paper plate with a modest scoop of mac and cheese and half a hot dog sliced into bite-sized pieces. No garnish, no small talk, just a quiet gesture that said, "You're welcome here." Thanks, Catherine said, her voice soft, almost uncertain. She picked up the plastic fork and took a bite. It was warm, salty. The noodles were overcooked and clumped together in places. But she didn't care. Maybe it was the cold air, or the way Emma kept glancing over to make sure she was enjoying it. But something in the taste grounded her. For once. Food wasn't performance. It wasn't being photographed or plated with tweezers. It was just food, honest and imperfect. Emma swung her legs beneath the table, kicking rhythmically. Do you live in your RV? Catherine nodded, wiping a bit of cheese from the corner of her mouth. Right now, yeah, it's kind of my house on wheels. That's so cool, Emma said, wide-eyed. It's like a spaceship. I bet it has everything. Catherine smiled. Just about. Tiny kitchen, tiny shower, even a bed that folds out of the wall. Huh, Michael chuckled, finally sitting down across from them. We've got a fold-out blanket in the back of the van. Doesn't sound quite as fancy. Sounds like a memory, Catherine replied, surprising even herself. They ate in near silence after that, the three of them tucked in close under a sky that had started to clear. A single star blinked through the clouds above. Catherine looked up, then back at the paper plate in her hands. For the first time in what felt like years, she wasn't thinking about work or headlines or expectations, just a warm meal, a quiet moment, and the company of two people who didn't want anything from her but her name. The remains of dinner sat in a neat pile at the edge of the table-stacked paper plates, crumpled napkins. The nearly empty salt jar returned to Catherine with thanks and a shy smile from Emma. The air had grown colder, but none of them moved to leave just yet. The kind of quiet that settled between strangers learning each other's rhythms had taken hold, not awkward, just unspoken. Michael leaned back slightly on the bench, arms resting along the top rail. He looked across at Catherine, studying her in the low light cast by the RV's exterior lamp. She sat with her hands around a chipped enamel mug he'd filled with the last of their cocoa powder, more warm water than chocolate. But she hadn't complained, if anything. She looked oddly content. So, he said, his voice casual, Where are you headed? Catherine traced the rim of the mug with her thumb, eyes fixed somewhere past the trees. Nowhere, she said simply. That's the whole point. Michael raised an eyebrow. Nowhere, she nodded. I got in my RV 3 months ago and just started driving. No maps, no itinerary, just away. He didn't answer right away, just tilted his head as if weighing whether to press further. I needed to get out of the noise, she added. Big city, bigger expectations. Everyone wanted something. I forgot what it felt like to want nothing. Michael exhaled through his nose, the sound close to a chuckle. Yeah, he said. That sounds familiar. Catherine looked over at him, surprised. You've done it. Sort of, he shrugged. Not by choice, at first, when Emma's mom passed. We had to start over. Sold the house. Left the neighborhood. We hit the road not knowing where we were going. Just knew we couldn't stay where the memories were. Catherine's expression shifted. Something soft, almost reverent. I'm sorry. Me too, Michael replied quietly. But sometimes getting lost is the only way you remember what matters. They sat there for another long moment, both watching Emma chase a wind-blown napkin across the parking lot. Her laughter echoing against the quiet. Catherine smiled. Then I guess I'm exactly where I need to be. The stars had finally broken through, scattered across the sky like someone had shaken a jar of light over the dark. The last of the clouds had drifted away, and the night turned crisp and still. Catherine stood near the edge of the picnic table, her mug now empty, the blanket around her shoulders fluttering lightly in the breeze. Michael packed away the stove, folding it with practiced ease and sliding it back into its case. The silence between them had grown comfortable, anchored by shared words, warm food, and the quiet rhythm of understanding. I should let you two get some rest, Catherine said, her voice soft, almost reluctant. Emma, now curled up in the back seat of the van with her stuffed bear clutched to her chest, looked up sleepily. You can stay if you want, she mumbled, voice thick with yawn. You don't look like you smile a lot. Catherine blinked, caught off guard, then smiled. It was small and a little sad, but genuine. You might be right. Michael chuckled, though the sound was quieter than usual. He met Catherine's gaze across the open space. Thanks for the salt. And the company. She gave a little nod. Thanks for dinner. With that, she turned and made her way back toward the RV, her steps slow not from weariness, but from something heavier. Something that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with how warm this moment had felt. Michael watched her go, the soft glow of the RV's lights swallowing her up as she stepped inside and gently closed the door. The lot dimmed a bit without her there. He shut the van door quietly and climbed into the front seat. Emma stirred in the back. She's nice, and she murmured, but she's lonely. Michael stared out the windshield toward the RV. The silhouette of Catherine passed briefly behind the window, then vanished again into shadow. Yeah, he said quietly, reaching back to adjust Emma's blanket. She is. He didn't say anything more, just leaned back in his seat, eyes on the stars above, wondering why a stranger's sadness had started to feel like something he recognized. The sun had barely crested the trees when the smell of coffee drifted across the rest stop, earthy and unmistakable. Morning light spilled gently over the lot, warming the edges of the gravel and catching dew on the picnic table. Michael stirred in the front seat of the van, blinking against the pale gold brightness. Emma was still curled up in the back, buried beneath her jacket like a cocoon. The world was quiet save for the distant hum of passing cars and the hiss of a kettle just beginning to boil. Michael rubbed the sleep from his eyes and stepped out into the crisp morning air. That's when he saw her. Catherine stood outside her RV, blanket gone, replaced by a soft gray sweater and jeans. She looked less like a mystery this morning and more like someone trying to blend in with a world she didn't quite belong to. In her hands was a sleek stainless steel thermos and 2 enamel mugs. Coffee, she called over. Lifting the thermos slightly, Michael hesitated, then crossed the short distance between them. You're just trying to pay me back for the mac and cheese. Catherine grinned. Guilty, but this might taste better. She poured the coffee, the steam curling into the morning air. He took the mug, nodding in appreciation after his first sip. It was strong, smooth, not the kind of stuff you'd expect at a rest stop. They stood there a moment, side by side in companionable silence. "So," Catherine said finally, eyes on the horizon, "where are you two headed?" Michael took another sip, buying himself time. "Not sure yet. Been heading west. Got a buddy in Aspen who said he might have work. Or maybe we just keep driving." She nodded like she understood. "Sometimes moving feels easier than stopping." Michael glanced at her, curious. "What about you always been on the road?" Catherine paused. "Not always. I had a life somewhere else. Lots of people. Lots of noise. I walked away from it." He didn't press. She didn't elaborate. They stood there with their secrets, warm mugs between their palms, both pretending not to notice how comfortable the quiet between them had become. The RV rumbled to life just after 9, its engine breaking the stillness like a low, reluctant sigh. Catherine had said a quick goodbye, nothing dramatic, just a gentle wave to Michael and a sleepy nod to Emma, who was munching quietly on a granola bar in the van's back seat. Michael offered a polite half-smile and lifted his coffee in parting. No promises. No see you laters. Just the quiet understanding that most people pass through. That's what this place was, a stop, not a destination. Catherine pulled onto the highway, merging into the slow lane as the trees began to blur beside her. The RV was warm, the air scented faintly with cedar and roast coffee, but she couldn't shake the cold that had settled in her chest. She told herself it made sense to leave. She had no reason to stay. No connection to the man with the tired eyes and steady hands. No ties to the little girl who had offered her a seat like it was the most natural thing in the world. But 3 miles down the road, she eased her foot off the gas. She could still see them, Michael cooking over that little stove, brushing the hair out of Emma's eyes, serving up a dinner that tasted like kindness. She could still feel the honesty in their silence. The way her name had sounded when Emma said it, not like it belonged to a woman on magazine covers, but like it belonged to someone who mattered for real reasons. The highway stretched ahead, long and lonely, a straight shot to more miles, more quiet nights in more empty places. Catherine slowed, turned on her signal, and pulled onto the shoulder. Her hands hovered over the wheel, unsure. She could keep going. That would be easier, cleaner, safer. But instead, she turned the RV around. No fanfare, no music swelling dramatically, just the hum of rubber on asphalt and the steady pull of something that didn't quite make sense but felt right anyway. She didn't know what she'd say when she got back. Maybe she wouldn't say anything at all. But for the first time in months, she wanted to be somewhere with someone, just passing through. The RV's back right tire gave out with a low, muffled thump, thump, thump just as Catherine re-entered the rest stop. The steering wheel tugged gently in her hands, and the vehicle groaned its discontent as she coasted to a stop on the gravel. She sat there for a second, gripping the wheel, forehead resting against the heel of her hand. Of course the tire would go. She just turned around, made the one choice she hadn't been making for months. And now she was paying for it with a flat and a bruised ego. She exhaled, pulled the parking brake, and climbed out. Michael had noticed the RV returning. He'd been reorganizing the minivan's back hatch, trying to find Emma's missing sock, when he heard the noise by the time Catherine stepped out. Frustration plain on her face. He was already walking over. "Trouble?" he asked, his tone light, casual, not mocking, just offering. She looked over at him, lips pressed into a tight line. "Apparently I made a wrong turn back to you, and fate decided to punish me with a tire that hates me." Michael crouched beside the RV, eyes scanning the damage. "It's not too bad, just flat, not shredded." She raised an eyebrow. "You can tell the difference by looking." "I can tell the difference by the way it sounds," he said, standing again and dusting his hands off. "Pop the storage hatch. You got a jack." Catherine blinked. "I think so. Probably." He gave her a quick smile. "Go ahead and check. I'll make it work." Within minutes, Michael was flat on his back beneath the RV, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Working with steady hands, Catherine hovered awkwardly nearby, hands stuffed in her sweater pockets. "You do this often?" she asked. "Flat tires," he said, voice muffled. "Enough times to stop counting. Big rigs, sedans, old farm trucks. They're all just nuts and bolts." She watched him how methodical he was, how calm, no showing off, no complaints, no need to be thanked, just fixing what needed fixing. "You're not used to people doing things for you, are you?" he added after a beat. Catherine stiffened, caught off guard. "No, I guess I'm not." Michael didn't say anything else. He just kept working. And for the first time in a long time, Catherine let someone help without negotiation, without conditions, just trust. By the time Michael tightened the last lug nut and lowered the jack, the morning sun had warmed the pavement enough that the chill had faded from the air. Catherine stood nearby, one foot tapping lightly, her arms crossed, but her posture had softened. She wasn't pacing or checking her phone. She wasn't even pretending to be busy. She was watching him. "Good as new," Michael said, rising and brushing dust from his jeans. "Though you might want to have the rest of your tires checked before too long. These look like they've seen better miles." Catherine offered a sheepish smile. "Probably a fair assessment of most things in my life right now." He chuckled at that, then stepped back to give her space to inspect the job herself, not that she would. He could tell she wasn't the type to second-guess a man who just fixed something without asking for anything in return. Emma ran up from the van, her arms wrapped around a ragged picture book. "Did you fix it, Dad? Good as new," he said again, crouching to ruffle her hair. Catherine watched them, watched that quiet bond, the small affirmations, the easy way Emma's hand found Michael's without even thinking. It stirred something deep and unsteady in her, something that made her speak before logic could catch up. "Hey," she said, voice a little higher than usual. "There's a scenic overlook a few miles up the road. It's on a bluff. Nice view. Picnic tables. Kind of a hidden gem. I was planning to stop for lunch." Michael looked at her, one brow raised. She cleared her throat and added, "I've got food. Real food. You know, stuff that doesn't come from a cooler." Emma's face lit up instantly. "Can we? Dad, please." Michael hesitated, glancing at the van, then back to Catherine. "You sure?" She nodded. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't mean it, and I wouldn't mind the company." He held her gaze for a second longer, reading the sincerity in her voice, then looked at Emma. "All right," he said. "Lunch with a view." Catherine smiled, small but real. For once, she wasn't running. She was inviting someone in. The inside of the RV was nothing like Michael expected. Emma gasped the second she stepped in, her boots thumping softly against the polished floor. "Wow," she whispered, spinning slowly as her eyes drank in the glossy white cabinets, recessed lighting, and soft leather seating that wrapped around a built-in dining nook. Catherine smiled, watching her take it all in like it was a castle on wheels. "You can sit wherever you like," she said, motioning toward the couch. "Just mind the step by the kitchen. I always forget and stub my toe." Michael followed slower, ducking slightly as he stepped through the door. His gaze moved across the space with quiet calculation, like a man trying to catalog every luxury without appearing impressed. The RV was spotless, elegant, and stocked. It didn't look like a wanderer's home. It looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. "This is nice," he said, carefully neutral. Catherine laughed under her breath as she moved toward the small kitchen. "You can say ridiculously over the top. I won't be offended." He just gave a tight smile and slid into the booth beside Emma, who was already running her fingers across the touchscreen controls by the window. "Do these buttons make the bed come out of the wall?" she asked excitedly. "Yep, that one controls the lights too. Just don't hit the retract awning button unless you want me yelling," Catherine replied. Michael watched her as she rummaged through cabinets, pulling out ingredients with a kind of stiff awkwardness. She was clearly out of practice, dropped a wooden spoon, opened the fridge 3 times looking for something she'd already grabbed, and stared at a package of pasta like it was written in another language. Still, she pressed on. "I used to cook," she said, half to herself. "Before work got big, before everything got so scheduled. The water finally boiled. She tossed in the pasta, then turned to slice tomatoes with careful precision, occasionally glancing back at Michael and Emma. Michael leaned back, arms crossed. "You're braver than most, letting strangers into your home and trying to cook." Catherine gave him a look. "You fixed my tire and gave me questionable mac and cheese. I owe you something edible." He smirked, just slightly. "Fair." It wasn't a perfect meal. The noodles were slightly overdone, the tomatoes uneven, and the dressing she made for the salad was more tang than taste. But when she set the plates down in front of them, hands trembling just a little, there was something else on the table, something warmer than the food itself. Care, effort, a gesture that didn't need to be perfect to be real, and that, Michael noted, was worth more than any five-star meal. The RV quieted after lunch, the clatter of forks replaced by soft murmurs, and the occasional giggle from Emma as she discovered more hidden buttons and compartments. Catherine moved to the small kitchenette, rinsing plates beneath the steady stream of warm water, her back to Michael and Emma. But her mind was far away, slipping sideways into memory, pulled back by the unexpected warmth of a paper napkin stained with tomato dressing, and laughter she hadn't expected to hear today. She'd grown up in a house full of rooms, not people. Her parents traveled more than they stayed, and when they were home, they spoke in clipped tones about numbers, image, and expectations. The help raised her nannies with rotating names, tutors who handed out worksheets like vending machines. She remembered sitting alone at a marble countertop, eating prepackaged meals while the city lights blinked through floor-to-ceiling windows. Lonely wasn't the right word. It had been emptier than that, like she existed in a vacuum, untouched and untouching of anything real. Business had become her way out, not just of her family's cold orbit, but of powerlessness. She was sharp, driven, unflinching. By 28, she was everywhere: magazine covers, keynote stages, Forbes lists. People clapped when she walked into rooms. They handed her million-dollar contracts like party favors. And she told herself that was enough. Until Richard, the first person who hadn't seemed impressed by her title, who took her to dive bars instead of rooftop lounges, who promised honesty and built her trust one long conversation at a time, until he tore it all down with a deal behind her back. Not just betrayal, but humiliation. She'd let him close too close, and he taught her that even the people who said they saw her could be lying. The day she left, she didn't pack much, just the basics and enough cash to disappear. The RV had been an impulse, freedom on four wheels, a way to keep moving so nothing could catch her. Until now. She looked over her shoulder, watching Michael quietly explain something to Emma, his voice low, steady. Their bond was unshakable, built on something real, something she'd never had, something she didn't trust herself to want. But here she was, still here, still watching, still wondering. The afternoon sun slanted low, filtering through the RV windows in warm, drowsy light. Emma had finally worn herself out exploring and had curled up on the couch with her book, her head nestled into the throw pillow like she belonged there. Her boots lay on the floor, one on its side, and her tiny socked feet twitched now and then as she read. Michael sat at the booth again, sipping from the same enamel mug Catherine had filled hours earlier, now topped off with tea across from him. Catherine had finally stopped moving. She sat with one leg folded beneath her, hands wrapped around her own mug. Her posture relaxed in a way that said she'd momentarily forgotten how to guard herself. They hadn't said much since lunch, not out of awkwardness, but something more deliberate, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Michael glanced toward the couch, then back to Catherine. "She's taken to you," he said. Catherine smiled softly. "She's easy to love." He nodded. "She is." For a moment, neither of them looked at each other. They just stared out the window, watching a leaf drift slowly across the windshield. "Were you close with your parents?" Michael asked after a beat, not pushing. "Just curious." Catherine let out a quiet breath. "Not really. They were distant, good at expectations, bad at affection." He nodded again, not surprised. "Mine were the opposite. loud and messy. Everything boiled down to love or frustration, usually both at once. Sounds better, she said. Sometimes. Another quiet settled in. Catherine turned her mug slowly in her hands. You talk about Emma's mom much? She asked. Michael didn't look up, but his fingers tightened slightly around the mug. Not often, when Emma asks. I tell her the truth, that her mom was kind, beautiful, too good for this world. Catherine swallowed, then said, I'm sorry. He finally looked at her. So am I. There was no follow-up, no long explanation, no digging, just the soft weight of two people recognizing something in the other. The echo of loss, the fatigue of surviving it, the gentleness that came from carrying it without bitterness. Catherine didn't offer comfort, and Michael didn't need it. What they gave each other in that moment was something quieter, understanding, and the fragile beginnings of trust. The rain came suddenly, as it often did in places forgotten by the radar. One minute the sky was a hazy gray, and the next, fat drops were drumming against the RV's roof in a steady rhythm. Thunder rumbled somewhere distant, low and lazy, like it couldn't quite be bothered to roar. They had planned to leave, or at least that was the unspoken agreement, but the storm pinned them down, and neither seemed in any rush to test the road. Catherine pulled out a folding camp chair and dragged it beneath the RV's awning, the rain tapping its metal like a metronome. She'd wrapped herself in a worn sweatshirt and held a chipped mug of something warm and vaguely herbal. Michael joined her a few minutes later, jacket zipped to his chin, hands in his pockets. Emma had fallen asleep in the van, worn out from the day and bundled in blankets. They sat side by side, legs stretched out, the smell of wet earth and pine settling between them. The fire pit nearby crackled softly, a small flame shielded under a makeshift canopy of sticks and tarp Michael's doing. Of course. Rain makes everything slower, Catherine murmured. Even time. Sometimes that's a good thing, Michael replied, not looking at her. For people who don't know what comes next, she smiled faintly, sipping her tea. You always talk like someone who's carrying more than he lets on. He shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe I've just been quiet long enough to see things clearly. The fire popped. Sparks spiraled up and disappeared into the dark. I used to think success would feel like freedom, Catherine said, voice low. I chased it so hard, built everything I was on it, but the higher I climbed, the lonelier it got, like I was building a house on glass. Michael finally looked at her. His eyes weren't surprised. They were calm, steady, like he already knew. You ever miss it? He asked. She considered. Sometimes, not the people, not the noise, but the certainty, the illusion of control. He nodded. Yeah, I miss that too. They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full of things unsaid but felt. The rain kept falling, a curtain around their little campfire world, and for the first time, both of them let their shoulders relax. Not all the way. Not yet, but enough. Enough to begin. The rain lingered through the night, softening by morning into a gentle drizzle that clung to the windows and left the world damp and still. The air was thick with the scent of wet pine and wood smoke, and the rest stop felt like an island quiet, slow, wrapped in gray, inside the RV. Warmth pulsed from the small heater, and the soft sound of laughter filled the space. Emma sat cross-legged at the table, tongue poking out in concentration, a sheet of printer paper in her hands. Catherine sat beside her, sleeves rolled to her elbows, mimicking each fold with exaggerated care. Okay, Catherine said, holding up her own creation. Now we fold the wings down like this. Emma mirrored the move, her eyes wide with focus. Like this. Perfect, Catherine said, a little surprised at the pride she felt swelling in her chest. You're a natural. Michael leaned against the doorframe, one hand cradling a steaming mug of coffee, watching them with an unreadable expression, something close to amusement, something close to wonder. The table was scattered with a few failed attempts, crumpled corners. Uneven wings, but two completed planes now sat proudly side by side. Emma's had pink marker streaks on the wings, and the word Flyer Queen scribbled on the side. Catherine's was crisp, minimalist, sleek. "You ready for the maiden flight?" Catherine asked. Emma grinned. "You first." Catherine stood, stepping back with dramatic flair, and tossed her plane through the air. It glided smoothly across the RV before bouncing off the couch and landing on the floor. Emma cheered like it had broken a world record. Michael shook his head, chuckling. "You've created a monster." "I like her monster," Catherine said softly, meeting his eyes for a brief, honest second, before anything more could be said. Emma clapped her hands. "Now pancakes." Catherine blinked. "Wait, pancakes? You promised last night," Emma said, crossing her arms in mock seriousness. "I said maybe," Catherine corrected. "She heard yes," Michael added with a shrug. Catherine sighed, reaching for the flower. "Fine, but you're both flipping your own." An hour later, the RV smelled like vanilla, syrup, and something dangerously close to joy. And as she watched Emma smear butter across a too-thick pancake with utter delight, Catherine realized how strangely natural it all felt, like she was part of something she hadn't known she'd missed. The rain had passed by late morning, leaving behind puddles that mirrored the sky and air that smelled like wet asphalt and pine. They'd packed up slowly, reluctant to move on but knowing they couldn't linger forever. The RV needed gas. So did the minivan. So they stopped at a rural station just off the two-lane highway, the kind of place where the coffee was burnt, the bathrooms questionable, and the newsstand dusty and thin. Michael sent Emma inside with a $5 bill and instructions for juice and a snack. He leaned against the hood of the van, the pump clicking rhythmically as it filled the tank. Catherine was parked beside him, head bent over her phone, finally catching up on messages she'd been ignoring. The bell above the convenience store door jingled, and Michael stepped inside to check on Emma. That's when he saw it. The magazine was tucked beside a row of auto weeklies and tabloids, its headline bold against the faded reds and yellows of the rack. Catherine Reynolds, billionaire tech queen, disappears from spotlight. Where did she go? Her face was angled perfectly, eyes confident, jaw set, hair glossy and styled within an inch of perfection. It was her, but not the woman flipping pancakes in a sweatshirt, not the one teaching Emma to fold paper wings. He stared at it for a long moment. Emma tugged at his sleeve, holding a bag of pretzels and a juice box. "Can we get gummy worms too?" Michael blinked. "Yeah, sure, kiddo. Go ahead." He grabbed the magazine, almost without thinking, and folded it under his arm. He didn't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe clarity, maybe a need to see the version of her the world thought they knew. Back outside, Catherine looked up as he approached. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Michael said, handing Emma her snacks. He met Catherine's eyes briefly, the magazine still tucked at his side. He didn't mention it. Not yet. But something had shifted, not anger, not disappointment, just a sudden awareness. The woman sitting in the RV wasn't just someone who'd run from her life. She'd built one first, and the whole world had been watching. The sun dipped low by the time they parked at another quiet rest stop. This one nestled against a low ridge of pines and boulders. The sky streaked in soft gold. Emma had fallen asleep in the van, a half-empty juice box still cradled in her lap, head tilted against the window. Michael didn't wake her. Instead, he walked slowly to the RV. The magazine rolled in his hand like a reluctant question. Catherine was inside, seated at the table, laptop open but untouched. She looked up when the door opened, and her smile faltered the moment she saw the expression on his face. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and placed the magazine on the table. Her face on the cover stared up at her, perfect, polished, poised, a version of herself she hadn't seen in months, and one she had no desire to return to. Michael stood with his hands in his pockets, saying nothing at first. Catherine stared at the glossy page, then sighed, pushing it gently aside. "I wondered when this moment would come. You could have said something." Michael said, not cold, just quiet. I know, she replied. I almost did a dozen times, but every time I started, I imagined how it would change everything. He nodded once, slowly. It does. Catherine looked out the window. The trees rustled faintly in the wind, and the sky deepened into twilight. I spent years being that woman, she said, gesturing to the one in the article. Always moving, always building, always proving something. To who, he asked. To everyone, she said. To my parents, to the investors, to myself. I didn't stop until I woke up one morning in my own penthouse and realized I hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, just emails, meetings, people smiling while they calculated what they could get from me. Michael watched her, his jaw tight but his eyes softer now. I wasn't running from fame, she continued. I was running from being a product, a paycheck. I didn't want to be seen as a brand anymore. I just wanted to be. She turned back to him. You and Emma, you never looked at me like I was worth something because of what I have. That's why I stayed. Silence settled between them again, heavier than before, but not sharp, not accusing, just real. Michael exhaled slowly. I don't care about the articles or your bank account, but I do care about the truth. Catherine nodded. You have it. All of it. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. For the first time, they were on level ground, no titles, no secrets, just two people carrying the weight of who they'd been and deciding what came next. The next morning was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after something has shifted, even if no one says it out loud. The air between them wasn't cold exactly, but it had thinned, like a window left open just enough for doubt to drift in. Michael packed the van slowly, methodically, checking straps twice and reorganizing bins that didn't need reorganizing. Emma bounced around as usual, completely unaware of the tension. She chatted about the squirrels she'd spotted near the trees and asked if they could make paper airplanes again later. Catherine smiled and nodded, but her eyes kept drifting to Michael. He hadn't really looked at her since the magazine, not the way he had before. Not with that open steadiness that made her feel like she could breathe again. He was polite, still helpful, still. But there was a new distance in his posture, in the way he answered her with short phrases and averted glances. A quiet wall had gone up, and she felt every brick. When she offered him coffee that morning, he took it with a quiet thanks and nothing more. She wanted to ask what he was thinking, wanted to push past the silence and just name it for what it was. But part of her was afraid of the answer, because the truth she had given him, the part of herself she'd buried for so long, might have been too much, or maybe just the wrong kind of truth. She stood by the RV steps, watching as Michael tied down the last of the gear in the van. His movements were precise, focused, like the act of doing was safer than talking. Michael, she said quietly, trying. He paused but didn't turn around. Yeah, she hesitated. You okay? He finally looked over his shoulder. His eyes weren't hard, just tired, guarded. Yeah, just a lot on my mind. She nodded, even though the answer hurt. Me too. The silence returned, settling between them like a fog, not hostile, just uncertain. They stood in it, each unsure whether to take a step forward or turn away. And for now, neither did. The rest stop they chose that evening was quiet and sun-dappled, tucked beside a stand of pine trees that caught the golden light just right. It was the kind of place you'd never remember on a map, but Emma would later remember it as magic. She didn't know. No one had remembered. Michael had. Of course, he always did. But this year, he hadn't planned anything, no balloons, no party, just a promise of pancakes in the morning and maybe a roadside gift if they passed a dollar store. That was all he could manage, and she never asked for more, which was why the sight waiting for her beside the RV took them both by surprise. Streamers, soft, pastel ones hung gently between two trees, taped carefully to branches with surgical precision. A little folding table had been set up beneath them, draped in a floral bedsheet that had clearly been repurposed as a tablecloth. At its center sat a small cake, homemade, a little lopsided, but glowing with 5 uneven candles, plus 3 more jammed in for good measure. Happy birthday, Emma, Catherine said softly, stepping out from behind the RV, hands still dusted with powdered sugar. Emma gasped, eyes wide. Is that for me? Catherine smiled, kneeling down to her height. It is. I wasn't sure what kind of cake you liked, so I guessed. There's vanilla and sprinkles and way too much frosting. Michael stood frozen, a duffel bag still in his hands. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched the scene unfold. Emma rushed forward and threw her arms around Catherine with the abandon only a child could give. This is the best surprise ever. I'm glad, Catherine said, holding her gently. You deserve a real birthday. Michael stepped forward finally, setting the bag down by the van. You didn't have to do all this, he said quietly. Catherine met his gaze, a flicker of emotion passing behind her eyes. I wanted to. It felt important. He didn't answer, but something inside him shifted as Emma danced around the table, blowing out candles and begging for the biggest slice. Michael saw it clearly, not the version of Catherine from the magazine, but the one who'd stayed, who'd paid attention, who cared enough to make something by hand just to make a little girl feel seen. And for the first time in days, the wall inside him cracked just a little, enough to let the warmth in. The fire crackled low, sending tiny sparks into the darkening sky. Emma had fallen asleep inside the van, still clutching a napkin-stained paper plate and a half-eaten slice of cake. Her head rested against a pile of blankets, sugar-fueled excitement finally giving way to the peaceful sleep of a child who knew she was loved. Michael sat beside the fire pit, knees drawn up, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm tea. Across from him, Catherine mirrored his posture, her legs tucked beneath her and her eyes fixed on the flames. The tension that had lingered between them the past few days was thinner now, softer around the edges, like snow beginning to melt. Thank you, Michael said, voice low, rough. For today, for what you did for her. Catherine didn't look up right away. It felt good to do something that didn't come from a calendar alert or a corporate event planner. Michael smiled faintly. Well, you nailed it. She won't stop talking about the frosting. Catherine chuckled. I think I overdid the sugar. You did, he said. It was perfect. They sat in silence for a long moment, the kind that carried weight but didn't press too hard, the kind that asked for truth without demanding it. She's all I've got, Michael said finally. After her mom passed, it was like the world shrank to just the two of us. Nothing made sense anymore except keeping Emma safe, keeping her okay. Catherine looked at him, then really looked. I know what that's like, she said. Not the same way, but grief makes everything sharper, quieter, like the volume gets turned down on everything else. He nodded. You carry it differently than most people. So do you. She drew a breath. I lost someone too. Not to death, just lost them when I realized they never really saw me. I think that broke something in me for a while, made me forget how to let people in. Michael studied her, the firelight flickering in her eyes. And now, I'm remembering. He didn't answer, but his silence was no longer closed, no longer distant. When their eyes met again, there was something else there, not resolution, not certainty, but the quiet, unmistakable beginning of trust. The ice was breaking, and beneath it, something warmer waited. The next morning broke with pale light and crisp air, the sky still shaking off the last of its clouds. Catherine stood outside the RV, sipping hot coffee from her favorite mug, the one with a chip in the handle and faded gold lettering that read, Stay Wild. She wrapped her sweater tighter around herself and watched the world stretch awake. Michael was already up. As usual, she'd learned that about him: he never wasted a sunrise. He was checking the van's oil when a rattling sound echoed from the highway entrance. A small sedan sputtered into the rest stop, its hood bouncing slightly with each bump, engine coughing like it had a smoker's lungs and a bad attitude. The driver, a man in his 50s with a worried expression and a phone clutched in his hand, pulled in beside the picnic area and popped the hood with a groan. Michael looked over once, then without a word grabbed his toolkit. Catherine followed at a distance, mug still warm in her hands. Need a hand? Michael called out. The man looked up, startled, then nodded with a sheepish smile. Yeah, I think it's overheating. I was hoping to make it another 10 miles, but she gave out. Michael was already crouching beside the engine. Looks like a busted hose clamp, he muttered. I've got something that'll hold you till you get to a real shop. The man blinked. You a mechanic? Michael shrugged. Just a dad who's fixed a lot of broken things. Catherine stood back, watching them. There was no performance in Michael's voice, no need for praise. He didn't talk down to the man, didn't boast, just got to work with quiet confidence. Sleeves rolled, hands steady, voice calm. Emma wandered over with a juice box in hand, settling next to Catherine like it was the most normal thing in the world. He does this all the time, Emma whispered. Helps people without thinking about it. Catherine smiled, eyes still on Michael. I can see that. It struck her then not just the goodness of him, but the ease of it. There was no image to manage here. No boardroom. No PR, just a man who showed up. Again and again. For the people around him. Not because it looked good, but because it was good. And in that moment, watching Michael wipe grease from his hands with a frayed rag, Catherine felt a pang of longing she hadn't expected, not for the life she'd left, but for the one she'd never known. The rest stop had gone quiet again. The traveler with the overheating sedan had driven off, waving his thanks. And Emma was busy building a pine cone village under a nearby tree, narrating each citizen with dramatic flair. Michael had gone to refill their water jugs, leaving Catherine alone at the picnic table, her half-finished coffee cooling beside her. That was when her phone buzzed once, twice, then again, persistent and sharp against the peaceful silence. She glanced down and felt her stomach tighten. Martin Reyes, chairman of the board, a name she hadn't seen on her screen since she left without a word. For a moment, she thought about letting it go to voicemail, pretending the signal was bad, pretending she wasn't here at all, but the guilt crept in like a draft under a door. She stood and stepped away, walking toward the edge of the lot where the trees grew thicker and the air felt heavier. She answered. Catherine. Martin's voice was clipped. All business as always. You're alive. That's good to know. I'm fine. Martin, she said, keeping her voice level. What's going on? You tell me. You disappeared. No one's seen you in months. You ghosted the board, canceled every meeting, and didn't tell your assistant where you were going. That was the point, she replied. Well, now the press is asking questions. Shareholders are nervous. We've got speculation from every angle: burnout, breakdown, secret buyout. People are starting to worry you're not coming back. Catherine exhaled slowly. Maybe I'm not. There was a pause. Well, that's not funny. It wasn't a joke. Another silence, longer this time. Then Martin's tone shifted, less sharp, more urgent. Catherine, you built this company. People believe in you. We've kept things stable, but it's not sustainable. You know that. We need you back, even just to make a statement. She closed her eyes. The trees whispered overhead, somewhere behind her. She could hear Emma's laughter, light and free. I need time. Martin, I need space. I need to figure out who I am without all of that. You don't have time, Martin said. We're calling a board meeting next week. You should be in that seat, not on some personal journey in the woods. Catherine didn't answer. You're running out of room to hide. Catherine. When the call ended, she stood there, phone heavy in her hand, heart heavier still. For the first time in weeks, the world she'd left behind wasn't distant anymore. It had found her, and it wanted her back. The sun had dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the rest stop. The light turned amber, warm and fleeting, like the end of something beautiful you didn't want to let go of. Catherine stood near the RV, arms folded, leaning against the side like it was the only thing holding her up. Her phone was tucked away, but the weight of the call still pressed on her shoulders like a second gravity. Michael sat at the picnic table, drying out Emma's damp socks near the fire pit. She was inside the van now, humming to herself, drawing with her markers, blissfully unaware that the air around the grown-ups had changed. Catherine watched him for a long moment before finally speaking. You ever think about leaving all of this behind? Michael didn't look up. You mean the glamorous world of gas stations and soggy socks? She smiled, but only briefly. I mean really leaving, starting over somewhere that doesn't come with limits, somewhere that isn't always scraping by. Now he looked at her, slowly, steadily. What are you saying? Catherine stepped forward, nervous in a way that felt unfamiliar. I've got money, too much of it. Probably. I've got connections, land, ideas, things I never wanted to do alone. She paused. I'm not asking you to fix anything for me. Michael, I'm asking if you'd consider building something with me. He said nothing, just studied her with the same quiet eyes that had seen through the polished version of her from the very beginning. I know it's fast, she added quickly. I know you don't trust easily. I wouldn't either. But I've seen the way you live, the way you care. You're exactly the kind of person the world needs more of. And if I'm going to go back to it, I want to do it on my terms, with people who matter. Michael stood, brushing his hands on his jeans, the fire casting flickers of gold along his jawline. You're talking about two different worlds, he said. You don't just stitch them together. I'm not asking for stitches, Catherine said softly. I'm asking for a chance. He looked away for a moment, toward the van where Emma's laughter floated out, small and unburdened. Then he looked back at Catherine and said nothing. Not yet. The fire had burned low, down to glowing embers and soft crackles. The stars were out now, scattered thick across the sky like spilled sugar. Michael stood with his hands deep in his jacket pockets, the night pressing in around him, colder than the one before. Catherine waited across from him, still near the RV, her expression calm but expectant. He wanted to say yes. He really did. But instead, he took a breath and shook his head. I can't, he said quietly. Catherine's eyes searched his face. Because you don't trust me? No, he said, and his voice was steady. Because I don't trust what it would cost. She flinched at that, just slightly. I've spent the last few years holding things together with duct tape and hope, he continued. Every choice I make, I ask myself if it keeps Emma safe, if it keeps her stable. I can't throw her life into something unproven because it sounds good in the moment. I'm not offering a fantasy. Michael, Catherine said, this isn't some fairy tale ending. It's real. I'm real. And I'm asking. I'm not a project, he interrupted, his voice firmer now. And I'm not a man you scoop up because you feel something you didn't expect to feel. Catherine's jaw tightened. You think that's what this is, charity? I think it's complicated, he replied, and maybe too fast for someone like me to trust. He looked down at his hands, calloused and rough, then toward the van where Emma slept soundly, her small world folded into the back seat. She's already lost one parent, he said. I can't afford to lose what little footing we have, chasing something that might not stick. Catherine nodded slowly, blinking hard. I get it. I do. The space between them stretched wide, not angry, not bitter, just full of everything they weren't ready to carry together. I'm not saying goodbye, she said finally. Michael nodded. I'm not either. But he stepped back into the quiet, into the safety of what he knew, because for men like him, dignity sometimes looked a lot like walking away from something they wanted, just to protect the thing they couldn't risk losing. The morning was quiet in that heavy, final kind of way where even the birds seemed to sing softer, as if they sensed something was ending. Catherine stood beside the RV, her bag slung over one shoulder, the keys in her hand trembling slightly. The sun filtered through the trees, casting long slashes of gold across the pavement, painting shadows that felt more like borders than light. Michael was helping Emma tie her shoes by the van, trying to keep his voice cheerful, trying not to look toward the woman who had, in such a short time, felt like a piece of something lost and suddenly found again. Catherine didn't want to go. Every fiber of her body screamed to stay, to fight harder, to find some other way to make this work. But the space between what she could offer and what he could accept was too wide. She'd seen it in his eyes, the hesitation, the fear, the unspoken vow that he couldn't risk letting Emma's world tilt again. Not even for something that felt like love. She took a breath, then crossed the lot slowly. "I'm heading out," she said, voice too even, too controlled. Michael looked up and met her gaze, nodding once. "Drive safe." There was a long pause, then Emma looked up, brow furrowed, confusion settling in as she scanned their faces. "You're leaving?" she asked, stepping forward. "Why?" Catherine crouched to meet her. "Because sometimes grown-ups don't always know how to stay, even when they want to." Emma's lower lip quivered. "But we're supposed to have pancakes again." "I know, sweetheart." Catherine smiled, but her voice cracked. "I wish we could." Emma's arms wrapped around her neck in an instant, tight, desperate. "Can't you just come with us, or we go with you? We could be together." Catherine closed her eyes, holding her close. Her voice was a whisper. "I want that so much." Michael stood frozen, watching his daughter cry into Catherine's shoulder, and though his heart clenched, he didn't stop her. He couldn't. Catherine kissed Emma's forehead, then gently pulled away. "Goodbye, baby girl," Emma cried as the RV pulled out, waving through her tears, and Michael stood beside her, silent, hand on her shoulder, trying not to cry himself. But deep down, he knew she had taken something with her and left something behind. The days that followed fell into quiet, predictable rhythm. Wake up, make coffee, pack the van, fix what was broken, drive, sleep, repeat. Michael returned to the road like a man slipping into an old coat familiar, worn, a little too tight in the shoulders. He and Emma moved from one rest stop to another, one small town to the next. He picked up odd jobs, brake pads, oil changes, a busted water pump on a tractor outside of Pagosa Springs, enough to keep gas in the tank and food in their cooler, enough to get by. But something had changed. The silence was heavier now, not from grief but from absence. Catherine didn't come up in conversation, not even once. He didn't tell Emma to forget. He didn't tell her anything at all. But when she mentioned the RV lady, her voice dipped softer, careful, like she wasn't sure if saying the name out loud would make her dad sad. It would have. Michael would wake some mornings before the sun rose, sitting on the edge of the van's front seat, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring at nothing in particular. He'd watch the horizon like it might hand him an answer he didn't have the courage to ask for. Catherine was everywhere and nowhere in the way Emma hummed when she colored, in the folded paper airplane still tucked into the glove box, in the sweetness of syrup when Michael made pancakes one morning, out of guilt more than celebration. He told himself he'd made the right choice, that stability mattered more than dreams, that protecting Emma was his purpose, and anything that threatened that, no matter how kind or beautiful, wasn't worth the risk. But at night, when Emma was asleep and the world was still, Michael would sometimes pull over on a quiet stretch of highway, turn off the engine, and stare into the dark. And he'd wonder, not loudly, not with regret, but with quiet honesty, if letting her go had been an act of love or of fear. Either way, she lingered, and so did the space she left behind. It was late afternoon when Michael pulled the van into the dusty parking lot of a roadside laundromat in a town so small the welcome sign doubled as the goodbye. The sun was high, casting a sleepy amber over everything, and Emma was stretched out in the back seat, drawing shapes into the condensation on the window with her finger. They hadn't planned to stop long, just laundry, a quick rinse of the dishes, maybe a hot meal if the local diner didn't mind a wriggly 8-year-old and a man who paid in cash. But when Michael opened the driver's side door, he noticed something tucked into the metal latch of the mailbox beside the laundromat's vending machine. At first, he thought it was junk mail, forgotten or misplaced. But then he saw his daughter's name, Emma Carter, written in neat, careful handwriting, no return address, just her name. He pulled it free, turning it over, scanning for any sign of who it was from, but he didn't need to. "Emma," he said softly, stepping around the van. She looked up, curious. "Yeah, you got a letter." Her eyes lit up as she sat up straight. "Me who would send me a letter." He handed it to her slowly. She tore the top open carefully, like it might be fragile. Inside was a single folded sheet of thick paper, pale blue. On it, drawn in bright crayon strokes, was a paper airplane with little dotted lines trailing behind it, like it was soaring, and next to it, in Catherine's looping script, still flying, "Come find me if you're ready." Emma stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at her dad. Her eyes were wide, soft with hope. "Does this mean we can go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael didn't answer right away. He took the letter gently, held it in his hands, and read the words again. A paper airplane, a challenge, a promise, a door still open. His throat tightened, and all he could manage was a quiet, maybe. But inside, something shifted. Maybe wasn't no. Maybe was the first word of a new beginning. Michael sat on the edge of the motel bed, the letter resting beside him like it carried more weight than paper should. The lights were dim, casting soft shadows against the floral wallpaper, and Emma was curled up on the second bed, hugging her stuffed bear and watching him with quiet expectation. He hadn't said much since she read the note. He hadn't needed to. Emma didn't push, but every so often, her gaze drifted to the letter, as if it might lift itself and fly them straight to Catherine's door. The question wasn't if he wanted to go, it was should he. There was work here. Barely. The garage paid just enough to keep them in motel and microwave dinners. The minivan was on its last legs, coughing every time they climbed a hill. And the future, if he was being honest, stretched out like more of the same safe, familiar, but painfully small. He'd built walls around them, thinking they were protection, but maybe they'd just been limits. The next morning, he made the first call. By that afternoon, he'd turned in his tools, shaken his boss's hand, and walked out with a final paycheck in his back pocket. He didn't look back. The van sold for less than he'd hoped, but enough. A friend, a scrappy old mechanic who owed him more favors than he could count, lent him a better one. Not pretty, but solid, reliable, big enough to hold the rest of their life, whatever shape it took. Emma helped pack. She didn't ask questions, just hummed while folding her clothes and tucked the paper airplane, drawing into a notebook like it was a map. On the morning they left, Michael buckled her in, paused with his hand on the ignition, and looked out at the quiet street behind them, the life they'd known, the sacrifices, the grief, the grit. Then he started the engine. They weren't driving toward luxury, not toward comfort or even certainty. They were driving toward possibility, toward a voice that said, "Come find me." And this time, he didn't let fear answer first. He let hope take the wheel. The tires crunched softly over gravel as Michael pulled into the familiar curve of Pinewood Haven, rest stop the same one where it had all begun. The trees rustled gently in the early evening breeze, and the golden light filtered through them just like it had that first day. The air smelled like pine and distant wood smoke, and the place, though quiet, felt anything but empty. Emma pressed her face to the window. "It's here," she whispered. "It's the same place." Michael nodded but didn't speak. His hand stayed firm on the wheel, his heart pounding with the quiet weight of hope laced with doubt. He hadn't called, hadn't written. He wasn't sure if she'd be here. He just came, and then he saw it. Parked beneath the same stand of trees was the RV, unchanged and unmistakable. Still sleek, still shining. But now it looked less like a retreat and more like a home. Catherine was outside, seated on the picnic bench with a book resting on her knee, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was barefoot, her hair pulled into a loose braid, and her face turned slightly toward the breeze, like she was listening to something only the wind could say. She looked up. Their eyes met across the lot, no words, no gestures, just that long, loaded glance that said everything they'd been carrying in silence. Catherine rose slowly, letting the book slide closed in her hand. She didn't move toward them, didn't call out. She just stood still, eyes wide and uncertain, heart flickering behind them like the porch light she hadn't turned on yet. Michael opened the van door. Emma was already unbuckling, practically bouncing in her seat. "Can I go to her?" she asked, breathless. He nodded. "Go!" Emma sprinted across the pavement, arms outstretched, A blur of boots and joy. Catherine dropped the book and knelt just in time to catch her, both of them laughing, crying, somewhere in between. Michael stepped out of the van slower, quieter. Catherine looked up, her arms still wrapped around Emma, and met his gaze again. Still no big speech, just the kind of look that asked, "Are you here to stay?" And in the stillness, Michael gave the smallest nod. Yes, and for once, that was enough. The sky blushed pink and orange as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long golden fingers across the clearing. The rest stop hadn't changed. It was still just a patch of gravel, a wooden table, and a few stubborn pines leaning against the wind. But tonight it felt different, warmer, brighter, alive. Michael knelt beside the same old portable stove, hands moving with quiet familiarity. He sliced peppers and onions on a cutting board balanced across his lap. A small cooler opened beside him. Emma darted between the van and the picnic table, setting out mismatched utensils with the focus of a kid on a mission. Catherine sat nearby, her legs tucked beneath her, sleeves rolled up, peeling garlic with clumsy fingers and a small grin. "You sure you want me doing this?" she asked, holding up a crushed clove. Michael smirked. "You did fine with the cake." "That was a miracle," she replied. "This is sabotage." He chuckled softly, shaking his head as he dropped the vegetables into the sizzling pan. The smell rose instant, familiar, humble, good. He stirred, the rhythm of it grounding him. They didn't talk about the weeks apart, didn't try to explain or unpack what had already been felt in that long look across the lot. There was no need. Emma plopped down on the bench beside Catherine, holding up two paper airplanes. "Guess which one's yours?" Catherine pointed to the one with crooked wings. "The one that'll crash dramatically." "Correct," Emma said proudly. "But it'll look cool doing it." Michael flipped the food in the pan and smiled. She's happy, he thought. And he was too, beneath the scars of doubt. Dinner was ready in minutes, just sautéed vegetables, rice, and a little cheese melted on top. Nothing fancy. No tablecloth, no wine, no music. Just 3 plates, a couple of plastic forks, and the gentle sound of cicadas waking in the trees. Catherine took a bite and closed her eyes. "Okay, I take it back. You're not just a mechanic, you're a wizard." "I've been called worse," Michael said, passing her a napkin. They ate as the stars came out, slow and unhurried. Laughter came easy. So did the quiet. Same stove, same fire. But everything had changed. The remains of dinner sat in a neat pile at the edge of the table, stacked paper plates, crumpled napkins. The salt jar retrieved from Catherine's RV and returned to its place in their makeshift kitchen. The air had grown cooler, but none of them moved to leave just yet. Emma had fallen asleep in the back of the van, wrapped in a cocoon of blankets and clutching the stuffed lion she'd had since she was 3. Through the window, Michael could see her small silhouette rising and falling with each breath, peaceful in a way that made his chest ache with something like gratitude. He sat on the picnic bench, elbows resting on his knees, staring into the low fire he'd built. Catherine moved quietly beside him, settling on the bench with a respectful distance between them, hands tucked into the sleeves of her oversized sweater. "Do you ever miss it?" Michael asked suddenly, his voice soft in the night air. The life you had before Catherine looked at him, surprised by the question, then back to the fire. She took her time, considering parts of it, she admitted finally. The sense of purpose. Sometimes, the feeling that I was building something that mattered. She paused, but not the emptiness, not the way people looked through me even when they were looking right at me. Michael nodded slowly, understanding in his silence. "What about you?" she asked. "Before all this, before the road," he exhaled, watching the embers glow and fade. "I was an engineer. Did I ever tell you that structural design for commercial buildings? Good at math, good at seeing how things fit together." He gave a small, rueful smile. "Turns out it's easier to calculate load-bearing walls than it is to figure out how to keep your life from collapsing." Catherine's expression softened. What happened? Besides Sarah dying, he finished for her, matter-of-factly but not unkindly. Everything got heavy. The house, the job, the routine, it all felt like it was pressing down, like I couldn't breathe. So one day, I just stopped, packed what would fit in the van, took Emma, and left. Just like that. Just like that, he confirmed. Some people thought I was running. Maybe I was, but it felt more like finding room to breathe. Catherine's hand moved slightly closer to his on the bench, not quite touching. I get that. They sat in silence for a moment, both watching the flames dance. I got a call, Catherine said finally, her voice hesitant. From my company, 2 days ago. Michael looked at her, eyes questioning but patient. There's been a security breach, major hack, customer data, financial records all compromised. She swallowed. They're scrambling. The board wants me back, not just for appearances this time. They need someone to steady the ship. And you're thinking about going, Michael said. It wasn't a question. I built that company, she said quietly. There are 5,000 people who depend on it for their livelihoods. I can't just... She trailed off. You can't just walk away. He finished for her. No. She looked at him directly now. But I also can't go back to being that person, the one who had everything and nothing at the same time. Michael studied her face in the firelight, seeing the conflict written there. So what happens now? Catherine took a deep breath. I don't know. That's why I sent the note. That's why I hoped you'd come. The fire popped, sending a small shower of sparks into the night sky. Neither of them spoke for a long time after that, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of questions, possibilities, fears, all the things they'd both carried alone for too long. Finally, Michael reached across the space between them and took her hand in his. It was a simple gesture, not grand or dramatic, just real. We'll figure it out, he said, and for the first time in years, those words felt like a promise he might be able to keep. The morning arrived with a hazy golden glow that filtered through the trees, painting everything in warm, drowsy light. Emma was the first to wake, scrambling out of the van with the boundless energy of a child who saw each day as a new adventure waiting to happen. She found Catherine already outside, seated cross-legged on a flat boulder near the edge of the clearing, a steaming mug cradled in her hands. Emma plopped down beside her without hesitation, leaning against her arm like they'd been doing this for years. Morning, Catherine said, smiling down at her. Sleep okay? Emma nodded, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I dreamed we were all flying in paper airplanes. Big ones. We went over mountains and oceans. Sounds like a good dream. It was, Emma agreed. Then, after a thoughtful pause, Are you staying with us now? Catherine's smile faltered just slightly. It's complicated, sweetheart. That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to explain something, Emma said with the kind of wisdom that only came from a life lived in the in-between spaces. Catherine laughed softly. You're right. You're absolutely right. She set her mug down and turned to face Emma more directly. The truth is, I have some things I need to take care of. Important things. Back in the world I came from. Emma's face fell. So you're leaving again? Not exactly. Catherine took her small hand. I'm thinking maybe we could all go together. Just for a little while. Would that be okay with you? Emma's eyes widened. All of us to your real house. If your dad agrees, Catherine said, glancing toward the van where Michael was still sleeping. It wouldn't be forever, just until I sort some things out. Emma considered this with all the seriousness an 8-year-old could muster. Would there be other kids? Probably not in my building, Catherine admitted, but there's a park nearby, and museums with dinosaurs, and an ice cream shop that makes flavors you've never even heard of. A slow smile spread across Emma's face. Dad likes ice cream, even though he pretends he doesn't care about it. Catherine squeezed her hand. I know. They sat together as the sun climbed higher in the sky, watching a pair of birds dart between the pines, both thinking about what it might mean to build a different kind of nest. Michael woke to the sound of laughter, Emma's high and bright, Catherine's softer but just as genuine. He blinked against the sunlight streaming through the van window, took a moment to remember where they were, who they were with, and what it meant. Then he climbed out, stretching muscles stiff from another night on the too-thin mattress in the back of the van. They were seated at the picnic table, a map spread out between them, heads bent close as Catherine traced a route with her finger. Emma was nodding enthusiastically, her ponytail bobbing with each movement. "Morning," he said, approaching slowly, trying to read the situation. They both looked up, caught in the act of something. "We're planning an adventure," Emma announced, barely containing her excitement. "Is that right?" Michael asked, looking to Catherine with a raised eyebrow. Catherine met his gaze steadily. "Just exploring some options." He nodded, understanding passing between them. They had decisions to make, and by the look of it, Catherine had already started making hers. "Coffee's ready," she added, gesturing to the thermos on the edge of the table, "and there might be some of those pastries left from yesterday." The normalcy of it struck him: the coffee, the map, the easy way Emma leaned against Catherine's side. It looked like family. It felt like possibility. "Thanks," he said, pouring himself a cup. "So what's this adventure you two are plotting?" Catherine took a breath. "I need to go back to San Francisco. Just for a bit. There's a situation at Reynolds Innovations that needs my attention." She hesitated, then added, "I was thinking maybe you and Emma might come with me." Michael's expression didn't change, but he took a long, slow sip of his coffee before answering. "To the city." "It wouldn't be permanent," she said quickly. "Just until things stabilize. I have a place with plenty of room, and Emma could see the dinosaurs and try the ice cream," Emma interjected, beaming. Michael couldn't help but smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. "Dinosaurs? Huh, sounds serious. And you could rest," Catherine added softly. "Really rest. Not just catch a few hours of sleep before you have to drive or fix something or worry about where the next dollar is coming from." He didn't answer right away, and Catherine didn't push. She understood what she was asking for: a man who had chosen the open road over walls and ceilings to step back into a world of concrete and glass. For someone who had found freedom in having nothing to tie him down, to accept a tether, however temporary. "Let me think about it," he said finally. And both of them knew it wasn't a no. Emma cheered as if he'd already agreed, running off to tell her stuffed animals about their upcoming adventure, leaving the adults alone with the weight of what might come next. "I won't make promises I can't keep," Catherine said once Emma was out of earshot. "I don't know exactly how this plays out, but I do know I want you both there. Not as a project, not as charity, as—" She searched for the right word. "As family," Michael supplied, his voice quiet but steady. Catherine's eyes met his, vulnerable and sure at the same time. Yes, it was the simplest word, but it held everything they'd both been afraid to name. They spent the day in a kind of suspended animation, going through the motions of packing up camp, cleaning the RV, preparing for a journey without officially deciding if they were taking it together. Emma bounced between excitement and anxiety, asking questions about the city one minute and clinging to her familiar toys the next. Michael watched her, recognizing the signs of a child trying to navigate change the same patterns he'd seen when they first hit the road 3 years ago. Only this time, the change wasn't born from loss but from something growing, something new taking shape. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the rest stop, Michael found himself alone by the van, methodically checking the tires, oil, engine, not because it needed it, but because his hands needed something to do while his mind worked through what his heart had already decided. The sound of footsteps made him look up. Catherine stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching him with that same quiet intensity she'd had since the first night they met. "You don't have to come," she said without preamble. "I understand why you might not want to." Michael straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. You've built a life out here, on your terms, free from expectations, from the weight of walls and mortgages and everything that comes with them. She gestured around them, at the open sky, the distant mountains. This is your home. No, Michael said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. This was never home, just a way station, a place to catch my breath. Catherine took a step closer. And now, he looked toward the van where Emma was arranging her toys in careful rows, talking to each one in turn, explaining the journey ahead. Now I think maybe home isn't a place. It's the people you choose to build it with. The words hung in the air between them. Not quite a declaration, but more than just an observation. There's something you should know, Catherine said after a moment. Something I haven't told you. Michael's brow furrowed slightly, bracing himself. When I was researching your background, yes, I did that, she admitted, seeing his expression. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I needed to understand. Anyway, I found something about Sarah, your wife. Michael stiffened. What about her? She worked for Reynolds Innovations, just for a summer, as an intern in the engineering department, years ago, before we were even a major company. Catherine's voice was gentle. I didn't know her. I wish I had. But when I found out, it felt like, I don't know, like maybe there was a reason our paths crossed. Like maybe she would have approved. Michael was silent, processing this new information, this unexpected connection to a past he thought he'd left behind. There's more, Catherine continued. When employees leave, even interns, they're asked to write a letter to their future self, to the company, to whoever. It's this tradition the HR director started. Most people write something generic, but Sarah's was different. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, held it out to him. I had them find it in the archives. I thought you should have it. Michael took it with a hand that wasn't quite steady. The paper was old, the creases well worn, like someone had opened and closed it many times before passing it on. He unfolded it slowly, recognizing Sarah's handwriting immediately, the looping curves of her letters, the way she dotted her I's with tiny circles instead of dots. To whoever finds this, he read aloud, voice barely above a whisper. Life is too short for small dreams. Build something that matters. Love someone who challenges you. And when the world tries to shrink you down to fit in its box, choose the wild, open spaces instead. But remember, even the freest birds come home to nest. They just choose their branches carefully. Michael stared at the words, feeling them echo in his chest like she was speaking directly to him across the years. Across the divide between the living and the dead. She knew, he said finally, looking up at Catherine with eyes that shimmered slightly in the fading light. Somehow, she knew what I would need to hear. Catherine didn't speak, just stood with him in the moment, letting the weight of it settle around them like dust after a long journey. I'll go with you, Michael said after a long silence. We'll go with you, to San Francisco, to whatever comes next. Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. The space between them had never felt smaller, yet neither moved to close it completely. Not yet. They both understood that some journeys needed to be taken one step at a time. The lights of San Francisco glittered like fallen stars as they crossed the Bay Bridge. The city laid out before them in a tapestry of gold and silver against the velvet night. Emma pressed her face to the window of the RV, eyes wide with wonder at the towers of glass and steel rising into the fog-kissed sky. It's like a fairy tale, she whispered, breath fogging the glass. Michael sat in the passenger seat, hands resting on his knees, watching the city approach with a mixture of apprehension and awe. It had been years since he'd been in a place this big, this bright, this alive with the pulse of thousands of lives intersecting in organized chaos. Catherine drove with practiced ease, navigating the late-night traffic with one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching out to point out landmarks to Emma, the Transamerica Pyramid, Coit Tower, the distant shadow of Alcatraz in the bay. Almost there, she said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of nervousness that Michael caught. This wasn't just their arrival in her world, it was her return to a life she'd walked away from, a life she now had to reconcile with the person she'd become in the quiet spaces between then and now. The RV pulled into a private underground garage beneath a sleek high-rise in Pacific Heights. Catherine punched a code into a keypad, and steel gates rolled open to admit them. The contrast couldn't have been starker, from open skies and dirt roads to concrete walls and security systems. "Home sweet home," Catherine murmured as she parked, the engine's rumble echoing in the cavernous space before falling silent. They rode the elevator in silence, Emma clutching Michael's hand on one side and her stuffed lion on the other. Catherine stood straight, keycard ready, but Michael noticed the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she took a deep breath as the doors slid open to reveal a short hallway with only one door at the end. "Penthouse?" Michael asked with a raised eyebrow. Catherine shrugged, a little embarrassed. It seemed like a good investment at the time. The door opened into a space that took Michael's breath away, not because of its opulence, though that was evident in every clean line and carefully chosen piece of furniture, but because of the view, floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire living area, framing the city and bay in a panorama that made you feel like you were floating above it all. Emma gasped, dropping her bags and running to press her hands against the glass. "Dad, look, we can see everything." Michael followed more slowly, taking in the details: the minimalist kitchen with its marble countertops, the plush white couch that looked like it had never been sat on, the abstract paintings that probably cost more than everything he'd owned in the last 5 years combined. "It's a lot," Catherine said, watching his face. "I know. It's beautiful," he acknowledged. Then, with a small smile, "But it doesn't look lived in." She returned the smile, rueful. "That's because it wasn't. Not really." She gestured around them. "This was a showpiece, somewhere to host the occasional dinner party or collapse after a 16-hour workday. I never thought of it as home." "And now?" he asked. Catherine looked at Emma, still entranced by the view, then back to Michael. "Now I'm hoping we can change that." They settled into a routine over the next few days, Catherine leaving early for the offices of Reynolds Innovations, returning late with takeout containers and stories of corporate intrigue that made Emma giggle, even though she didn't understand half of it. Michael explored the city with Emma during the day, rediscovering the rhythm of urban life, the way crowds moved, the constant hum of activity that had once been as natural to him as breathing. He found himself watching Emma closely, looking for signs of distress or discomfort, but she bloomed in the new environment, wide-eyed at the dinosaur bones in the California Academy of Sciences, chattering excitedly about the sea lions at Pier 39, making friends with the barista at the corner cafe who snuck her extra whipped cream on her hot chocolate. At night, after Emma was asleep in the guest room, now decorated with hastily purchased stuffed animals and a star projector that cast constellations on the ceiling, Michael and Catherine would sit on the balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and the quiet space between their very different days. "The board wants me to take over as CEO again," Catherine said on the fourth night, swirling the red wine in her glass without drinking it. "Permanently?" Michael nodded, unsurprised. "And what do you want?" She looked out at the city lights, considering. "I want to build something that matters, something real, but I don't want to lose myself in it again." "You won't," Michael said with a certainty that surprised them both. "How can you be so sure?" He smiled, gentle and knowing. "Because this time you have people who will pull you back before you disappear." Catherine's eyes met his, filled with a gratitude that went beyond words. Then she reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his with a quiet certainty that felt like coming home. "There's something else," she said after a moment. "Something I've been thinking about." Michael waited, patient. "What if we didn't stay here, not long term? Anyway," she gestured at the penthouse, "the city beyond. What if we found somewhere in between, not the road, not this tower, something with roots but also room to breathe?" "You mean like a house?" Michael asked, the concept feeling almost foreign after so long without permanent walls. "I was thinking more like a homestead," Catherine said, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice. "I have this property in Northern California, near Mendocino. 20 acres, woods, a creek. I bought it years ago as an investment, but she hesitated. I always had this dream of building something there, something sustainable, self-sufficient. Michael leaned forward, interest peaked. Interest, like a farm, like a community, she clarified. A place where people could learn skills building, growing food, renewable energy, where Emma could have space to run and trees to climb, but also access to good schools, where you could use your engineering background to design sustainable buildings. And where you could do what? He asked, genuinely curious. Catherine laughed softly. Honestly, I'd like to get my hands dirty for once. Plant things, watch them grow, maybe run the tech side remotely. Come into the city once a week for meetings. The idea hung between them, shimmering with possibility. Michael could see at the land, the buildings rising from carefully drawn plans, Emma running through fields of wildflowers, Catherine with soil under her fingernails instead of designer nail polish. It sounds like a dream, he said finally. It doesn't have to be, she replied. Dreams are what you chase. This could be what we build. The word we settled over them, warm and certain, no longer a question, but a foundation. The next morning, Catherine took a rare day off, and the three of them drove north in a rented SUV, leaving the city behind as the landscape changed from urban sprawl to rolling hills to dense forests that crowded close to the winding coastal highway. Emma bounced in her seat, pointing out every animal she spotted: deer at the edge of the woods, hawks circling overhead, once even a fox darting across the road in a flash of russet fur. Are we almost there? She asked for the dozenth time, pressing her face against the window as they turned onto a narrow dirt road that cut through a stand of towering redwoods. Just a few more minutes, Catherine promised, navigating the bumps and ruts with careful attention. And then they were there. The trees opened up to reveal a natural clearing, a meadow of wild grasses and late summer flowers sloping gently down to a creek that glittered in the mid-morning sun. On the far side, the land rose again, crowned with a mix of oak and maple trees already beginning to hint at their fall colors. There was nothing man-made in sight except for a small, weathered cabin near the tree line, more of a hunter's shelter than a proper dwelling, but standing firm against the elements nonetheless. They climbed out of the car, the silence enveloping them, not the empty silence of absence, but the rich, living quiet of nature, breathing all around them. Emma immediately ran toward the creek, her laughter floating back to them on the breeze. Michael turned slowly, taking it all in the quality of the light filtering through the leaves, the solid feel of the earth beneath his boots, the distant mountains framing the horizon like guardians of this hidden place. What do you think? Catherine asked, trying to sound casual but unable to hide the hopeful tension in her voice. Michael didn't answer immediately. He walked a few paces into the meadow, crouched down to run his fingers through the grass, stood again to gauge the path of the sun across the clearing. His engineer's mind was already working, calculating angles, evaluating drainage, considering where a house might sit to catch the morning light but stay sheltered from winter storms. I think, he said finally, turning back to her with a smile that reached his eyes, that Emma's going to need a bigger coat for winter up here. Catherine's breath caught. Is that a yes? It's a let's try, he amended, honest as always. No guarantees, but this place, he gestured around them, it has good bones. It was enough, more than enough. Emma came running back, cheeks flushed with excitement, clutching a smooth river stone in her hand. Can we build our house right here? She asked, pointing to a spot where the meadow rose slightly, providing a view of both the creek and the distant mountains. Michael and Catherine exchanged a look, surprised, amused, and touched by her immediate acceptance of this place as theirs. Maybe, Catherine said, kneeling to examine Emma's stone, we'd have to draw up plans, see what would work best. Dad can do that, Emma said with complete confidence. He's really good at building things. He is, Catherine agreed, glancing up at Michael with a warmth that made his heart stutter in his chest. And you can plant a garden, Emma continued, already envisioning their life here. With strawberries and carrots and those purple flowers that smell nice. Lavender, Catherine supplied. Yeah, those. Emma spun in a circle, arms outstretched. And I can have a treehouse. Right. Dad, Michael laughed, the sound freer than it had been in years. Let's build a regular house first, kiddo. Then we'll talk tree houses. They spent the rest of the day exploring following the creek to where it widened into a small swimming hole, discovering a stand of apple trees gone wild but still bearing fruit, finding a flat rock perfect for picnics overlooking the valley. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, they sat on that rock, sharing the apples they'd picked and the sandwiches Catherine had packed that morning. Emma leaned against Michael's side, drowsy with the day's adventures, while Catherine sketched rough ideas in a notebook where the house might go. Gardens, workshops, a greenhouse for winter. We could use solar panels here and here, Michael suggested, pointing to the south-facing slope. And maybe a small wind turbine up on that ridge. Rainwater collection systems, Catherine added, making notes. And the creek for irrigation. Can I have chickens? Emma asked sleepily. The lady at the farm we visited in Utah let me collect eggs. Chickens sound perfect, Catherine agreed, adding them to her growing list. They worked together as the light faded, planning not just a house but a life one that took the best of both their worlds and wove them into something new, something that belonged uniquely to them. As they packed up to head back to the city, Michael paused, looking out over the land one last time. Catherine came to stand beside him, her hand finding his with the easy familiarity that had grown between them. It won't be easy, he said, voicing the practical concerns that would always be part of who he was. Building from scratch, starting over. No, she agreed, but we've both done hard things before. He turned to look at her, this woman who had stepped out of an RV and into his life with salt for their dinner, and questions that made him think beyond the next mile marker. We have. Emma called to them from the car, impatient to start the journey back, already talking about what color she wanted to paint her new room. They walked hand in hand across the meadow, toward their daughter, toward the future they were choosing to build together. The old cabin watched them go, standing sentinel in the gathering dusk. It had weathered many seasons, seen many dreams come and go. But this one, it seemed to whisper to the trees and the creek and the wild things that made their home here. This one might just take root and grow. 6 months later, the meadow was transformed. The skeleton of a house rose from the earth, timber frame, and soaring windows that would capture both the sunrise and the sunset. Solar panels glinted on the south-facing roof, and a stone path wound from the front door down to the creek. Where a simple footbridge spanned the rushing water, the day was crisp, autumn sliding toward winter, the trees blazing with color against a sky so blue it hurt to look at it for too long. A small group had gathered for the raising of the final beam, friends from the city, neighbors from the nearby town, the construction crew that had become like family over the months of building. Emma stood between Michael and Catherine, bouncing on her toes with excitement. She wore overalls smudged with dirt and paint, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face freckled from days spent outdoors. At her feet, a puppy, a recent addition named Rocket, chased leaves that skittered across the ground in the brisk breeze. "Ready?" Michael asked, looking down at her with a smile that had grown easier, more frequent. As the house had taken shape, Emma nodded vigorously. "Ready?" Catherine handed her a marker, and Emma carefully wrote on the beam that would crown their home, "Carter and Reynolds Family Built with Love Fall, 2025. Michael added his signature below hers, then passed the marker to Catherine, who hesitated only briefly before adding her name alongside theirs. Together. They watched as the crane lifted the beam into place, the workers securing it with practiced efficiency. A cheer went up when the last bolt was tightened, echoing across the clearing and returning to them from the surrounding hills like a blessing. Later, as twilight gathered and their guests departed, the three of them sat on the platform that would soon be their front porch, wrapped in blankets against the evening chill. Rocket curled at their feet. "It's real," Emma said with satisfaction, leaning her head against Catherine's shoulder. "Our house." "Almost," Michael corrected gently. "Still lots of work to do." Inari, but the hard part's done, Catherine said, reaching across Emma to take his hand. We've built the foundation. Michael's fingers tightened around hers, warm and sure. Yes, he agreed, looking from her to Emma and back again. The foundation is solid. Above them, the first stars appeared, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. Emma pointed out the constellation she'd learned Orion's belt, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia on her throne. Which one's your favorite? Catherine, she asked, yawning despite her best efforts to stay awake. Catherine considered the question, her gaze sweeping across the vast canvas of the night sky. I don't know if I have a favorite star, she said finally, but I think my favorite constellation is the one we're making right here. The three of us. Emma nodded, satisfied with this answer, her eyes drifting closed as the day's excitement gave way to exhaustion. Michael looked at Catherine over Emma's head, his expression soft in the gathering darkness. When did you get so wise? He asked, only half teasing. Catherine smiled, the kind of smile that started in her eyes and worked its way down to her lips. Around the time I learned that home isn't a penthouse or an RV, or even this beautiful place we're building, it's wherever we're together. The night settled around them, peaceful and promise-filled. In the distance, an owl called, its voice echoing through the trees. Rocket twitched in his sleep, chasing dream rabbits, and the stars continued their ancient journey across the sky, bearing witness to this small, perfect moment in the story of three lives that had found their way to each other against all odds. Michael didn't know what tomorrow would bring challenges, certainly, along with joys and sorrows and all the messy, beautiful complexity of a life shared. But sitting here, with Emma's steady breathing and Catherine's hand in his, he knew with bone-deep certainty that they would face it together, and that, he thought as he gazed up at the star-strewn sky, was worth more than all the freedom in the world. The foundation was solid, the walls were rising, and at the heart of it all, a simple truth that had begun with a girl asking for salt and a woman who had everything but a home. Sometimes the most unexpected detours lead exactly where you're meant to be. You just have to be brave enough to follow them, in the quiet of the night, with the house taking shape around them and their lives intertwining like the roots of ancient trees. Michael, Catherine, and Emma weren't just building a homestead. They were building a constellation of their own 3 points of light, connected forever in the vast, beautiful dark. And it was enough. It was everything.